Hello students, welcome to La Excellence IAS KALAM program, a GS Mains answer writing series. This is the season 2, episode 8. I am Kiranmai and I am going to present this season for about 50 episodes. Let us see today's question. What are the functions of regional rural banks? Examine their role in achieving financial inclusion in India. This question is for 10 marks and it is for 150 words. This question is from GS paper 3 from the economy section from the topic of banking. Okay, so this question is having two parts. The first part is asking about the functions of regional rural banks and the second part is asking about their role, that is the regional rural banks' role in achieving financial inclusion in India. Okay, so the question is in two parts. So we are going to answer it in two parts. Okay, let us see the context in which this question was asked. If you have seen yesterday's newspaper, there was a report that Cabinet has approved recapitalization of regional rural banks to the tune of 1340 crore rupees with a centre's share of 670 crore rupees. So what do you mean by recapitalization? Recapitalization literally means pushing money into these banks so that their financial base can be enhanced. Why this is needed? See, our Reserve Bank mandates 9% capital adequacy ratio. Capital adequacy ratio is otherwise known as capital to risk weighted assets ratio. That is the capital that they possess to the risk weighted assets that they have got. What are assets for a bank? The loans that it gives are the assets for a bank. Okay, these loans, some of them may be risky loans. So what is the capital with respect to their risky loans is the capital to risk weighted assets ratio. So as to maintain this at 9%, and because these banks, some of these banks were not able to maintain it at 9%, the central government has taken a decision to recapitalize these banks. Okay, in this context, this question has been asked. Let us now look at the prerequisites required to answer this question. Okay, one needs to have an idea of the history of regional rural banks, why they were formed despite having scheduled commercial banks, and there was bank nationalization also done in 1969 with an aim to serve the unserved population of the country. Despite that, these regional rural banks had to be formed because rural areas were not receiving adequate credit, and in 1975, following emergency imposition, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, she has evolved a 20-point program, of which one point was about a mechanism for increasing rural credit. Okay, so the main aim of regional rural banks is to achieve rural credit mechanism in India. Okay, both financial as well as banking services in the rural areas. So this history one needs to have, and second, we need to know the mandate or objectives. That is the same thing which we had discussed in the history, that is to provide banking and financial services to the rural areas. And then third prerequisite would be, at the grassroots level, what are all the functions performed by these regional rural banks? Apart from the banking services, apart from credit giving, they also perform functions like dispersal of Mahatma Gandhi Narega funds. Okay, so Mahatma Gandhi Narega funds are given through this, pensions are given through this. Okay, they also participate in penetration of insurance mechanisms in the rural areas. So all these grassroots level functions, one needs to have an idea. And then we also need to know, to answer the second part of the question, what is financial inclusion, what is the meaning of it, and then we need to know what is its status in India. Okay, what do you understand by financial inclusion? Is it just that every person needs to have a bank account, or every family needs to have a bank account? It is not just that. It is about access to credit, access to insurance services, access to financial literacy, that is financial advisory services. So all these things come under financial inclusion. You need to have a clear-cut definition of what financial inclusion means, and then you also need to know what is its status in India. For example, we have about a banking coverage to about 80% of our population. However, For direct benefit transfer, only 23% of Jan Dhan accounts are being used so far. So some information like this, some facts like this will give value addition to our answers. Okay. Apart from this, you also need to know the role of regional rural banks in financial inclusion. So if you have got any fact which says about the importance of regional rural bank in financial inclusion, such could be an important point in mentioning in our answer. Okay. So after the prerequisites, let us look at how to write the answer. The answer would consist of 3 parts: introduction, body and conclusion. In this question, because the functions he is asking in the subpart, it's better to restrict our introduction to the definition of regional rural bank and a brief history of it. We need not write the mandate, objectives and all, because we are anyway going to write the functions in the first subpart of the answer. Okay. So introduction, we are going to write the definition of regional rural banks, a brief history of it. And then in the body part, in the first part we will be writing about the functionals of regional rural banks, that is their provision of banking and financial services in the rural areas. They are providing Mahatma Gandhi Narega funds, pension funds, insurance services they are providing. They are providing equity related product services. So all these things can be mentioned in the first part of the answer. In second part, examine their role in achieving financial inclusion in India. What are we going to write here? If we have any specific fact relating to RRB's role in financial inclusion, we can write that because it will give a value addition. Otherwise, we will have to describe about what is financial inclusion in the second part of the answer, and then we have to establish linkages between the functions of regional rural banks and what is meant by financial inclusion. If we are able to establish this linkage, we can present to the examiner the role of RRBs in achieving financial inclusion in India. Okay. Coming to the conclusion, as I always say, the conclusion has to be on a positive note. You can mention here about the problems that are being faced by regional rural banks and about the measures that government is taking to revive them. For example, the recapitalization measure which I discussed in the context. Also, some of the RRBs are planned to be getting merged. Okay, so you can tell about some of the plans for reforming these regional rural banks so that they will perform better. Okay, that will give an optimistic conclusion through this answer. Now let us see one of the sample answers written by a student. So he writes, regional rural banks are scheduled commercial banks formed under Regional Rural Banks Act of 1976. These are micro banking institutions with hybrid nature. He has drawn a small subdivision. In the first part here, he is writing local orientation and small scale like cooperatives, that is cooperative banks, I think. And here he has written business culture like commercial banks. So that is a small introduction mentioning about the history and also about its nature. Okay, so he is talking that these have got features of both cooperatives as well as commercial banks. This is a decent introduction. He has also written there are currently around 45 RRBs in India. They are regulated by RBI and supervised by NABARD. So whatever information that he has got, he has tried to consolidate it in a small introduction. Then he goes on writing functions of RRBs. That is, he is trying to address the first part of the question. What has he written here? He writes banking services to rural and semi-urban areas, giving credit to small and marginal farmers, agricultural laborers, socio-economically weaker sections, small entrepreneurs, etc. So he is trying to address here the target population whom the regional rural banks are going to give the credit to. Okay, so he is trying to write what are the target population that this rural banks will give support to. Okay, and then he goes on writing para banking services which include insurance, equities, like that. Okay, he also writes dispersal of rural pensions, Mahatma Gandhi Narega wages, etc. So these are all valid functions of RRBs. He has written in a systematic manner, in a point-wise manner, highlighting some of the important targets. Okay, and let us see what he writes further. Here he has written about financial inclusion. So he has ended the functions part there and he has come to the second part. He has written here about financial inclusion. What is he written? He has written ensuring access to financial services. So he's talking about access, and then timely and adequate credit at affordable cost. So he's talking about affordability of the credit, adequate credit, timely credit. See, the problem in rural areas is that of money lenders. Okay, so these regional rural banks play a major role in preventing the farmers from getting into debt trap of money lenders. Okay, whenever we are going to give them timely adequate credit at affordable cost, we are going to save the farmers from money lenders clutches. Okay, so that point he has mentioned here, and then he has also written about parabanking service provision and financial advisory services. So here he is trying to mention about what is meant by financial inclusion. Okay, in the previous segment he has discussed about regional rural banks. Okay, and let us see what he writes further. He writes that 70% of population in India is rural, and more than 60% of Indian economy is dependent on rural economy. In view of high rural population in India, and as RRBs are providing credit, banking, parabanking and advisory services in rural areas, RRBs can be said to have a major role in achieving financial inclusion. So not much factual points about the role here, but he's tried to establish the linkage between financial inclusion, what is meant by financial inclusion, or what are the goals of financial inclusion, and between the functions of RRBs. So that linkage he is trying to get it here. He has mentioned that majority of the population in India is rural and 60% of economy is also rural based. Okay, and that RRBs are performing all these functions which are mentioned in the financial inclusion goals. So I think this is a good enough linkage to have to address the second part of the question. Okay, let us further see what he writes. He is writing, as many of the RRBs financial viability is under threat. Okay, he should have written this. As many of the RRB's financial viability is under threat, measures like recapitalization and amalgamation are being done, and these are steps in the right direction. So whatever we have discussed, he has given a positive conclusion with measures that are already being taken, and he says that these steps are in the right direction. This is a decent enough conclusion, which is optimistic that steps have been taken in the right direction for betterment of regional rural banks. So this is a decent answer with a good introduction, good body part. It would have been better if some fact was added here in this part. Okay, please do comment in the comment section if you can recollect any fact relating to the role of RRBs in getting financial inclusion. That is, because of RRBs, if some percentage of population could get financial inclusion, something like that. If any such fact is there, do mention it in the comment section. So let us get back to the discussion. We have discussed about the answer. It is a decent answer. The conclusion is also good. Overall, it is a decent answer. It will be fetching good marks because it has tried to establish the linkages, though it has not given a fact here. So overall it is a decent answer, and let us come to the end of the discussion. We have discussed about what are the subparts of the question, how to approach this question, what are the prerequisites required, what is the context in which this question was asked. We have also discussed a sample answer. Okay, let us all meet tomorrow. Thank you. Have a safe time at home.